Hi, everybody. This is part two of our series on the Supreme Court. So, this one is just on the justices that make up the court. So, if you remember, there's nine of them, and the Chief Justice is John Roberts. John Roberts was appointed by George W. Bush. He's considered a conservative, which means his beliefs are more traditional. He's thought of as being very popular and very fair minded. If you remember, Supreme Court justices are nominated by the president, but they then must be approved by the Senate. So the Senate has 100 people. His approval was 78 to 22, which you can see he's very, very highly thought of. It was a pretty easy approval. Um, Even though he tends to lean conservative, he's often thought of as a swing vote. In other words, there's four pretty reliable conservative justices and four pretty reliable liberal justices. John Roberts is one that will often break that tie. He usually goes conservative, but some of his more famous cases, he's leaned more liberal. For example, the Obergefell versus Hodges case, he leaned with the more liberal opinion. That's the case that legalized same sex marriage in the United States. And another famous case, the case involving Obamacare, Justice Roberts ruled that it was constitutional. More recently, you've seen Justice Roberts in the news. Um, so, in an impeachment hearing, the Senate will be the trial, and the judge for the case will be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So, you can kind of see him there in the middle of the picture. So, the most senior judge on the court is Clarence Thomas, by which I mean he's the judge that's been there the longest. He's the second African American justice, and he was appointed by George Bush Sr. His vote was a little bit closer. His was 58 to 4, I'm sorry, 52 to 48. Judge Thomas is known for being very quiet. A lot of times during a Supreme Court trial, the justices will interrupt the lawyers and ask questions. He's known for for being very quiet. He likes to let the lawyers make their case. He doesn't talk very much during a trial. He's been on the court for 28 years. So the next most senior justice is Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's 87 years old. She was appointed by Bill Clinton, and you can see her vote. She was pretty popular when she was put on the court, 97 to 3. Um, she kind of has an interesting life story. She's from New York. Her mother died the day before she graduated from high school. She went to school at Harvard Law School, and she was one of the only women in her class. And I think that left a mark on her because she's very famous for ruling on cases that try to promise gender equality or women's rights. She also has the nickname Notorious RBG, and she's famous for, even though she's 87 years old, she has a very popular workout program. So the Supreme Court has their own gym. So these are pictures of Justice uh, Ginsburg in that gym. You can see for being 87, she's in really good shape. One of her most famous rulings was a case involving the Virginia Military Institute. She ruled that women should be allowed to enter that military school. She's also famous even for the health challenges she's had over the years, like cancer. She's never missed a day of oral arguments. The next justice is Stephen Breyer. He's also a liberal. He was appointed by Bill Clinton, and his was a pretty easy confirmation, 87 to 9. Justice Breyer, before this, was an assistant professor at Harvard. Um, he's known, he enjoys riding his bike. He's twice been in pretty serious bike accidents. He's also known, his opinion towards the Constitution is that you shouldn't take a strict view of what the founding fathers wanted. You should view the Constitution more as how it would affect us today. So that makes him a pretty reliable liberal justice. Our next most senior justice is Samuel Alito. He's a conservative. He was appointed by George W. Bush, and the vote was 52 to 48 in the Senate. I remember his confirmation hearing. I know it was really close because some folks in the Senate were concerned he was too conservative. Uh, Justice Alito believes that every case ought to be viewed case by case. In other words, you don't really have like overriding ideas that you apply every time. Everything has to be looked at on a case by case basis. He is the son of immigrants himself, and so he's thought to be very compassionate towards cases involving immigration. Our next justice is Sonia Sotomayor. She's a liberal. She was appointed by Barack Obama, and her Senate confirmation vote was 68 to 31. Ms. Sotomayor is the third female justice, and she's the first Hispanic justice. Both of her parents were from Puerto Rico. She learned English. She grew up in the Bronx in the government housing, and she graduated first in her class in high school. One of her most famous cases before she became a Supreme Court justice involved the Major League Baseball strike in 1995. There was a disagreement between the players and the owners, and the players went on strike, and the case went before Justice Sotomayor, and she ruled that some of the things the owners were asking for from the players were illegal. And so, with those struck down, the players agreed to go back to work and played baseball again. So sometimes people call her the justice that saved baseball. So our next justice is Elena Kagan. She's also a liberal and also appointed by Barack Obama. So she's the fourth female justice, and her confirmation vote was 63 to 37. She's famous for being a fan of Marvel. One of the cases that came before her that she wrote the opinion on was a case involving a copyright. This was for a toy. I guess it was something with Spider-Man where he would shoot webs. And the gentleman that created this toy held a copyright on this feature, and his copyright expired, but he wanted to still be paid royalties. In other words, paid money when people used his idea. And the court ruled that since the copyright had expired, he wasn't entitled to that money anymore. So the next justice is Neil Gorsuch. He was appointed fairly recently. He's a conservative appointed by President Trump. His vote was 54 to 45. Um, if you remember, his vote was really close um, because before President Trump took office, President Obama had nominated someone, Merrick Garland, and Merrick Garland did not get a vote in the Senate. So when President Trump was elected, there was an empty seat on the Supreme Court, and he chose Neil Gorsuch to fill it. I think that's why his confirmation was kind of controversial and why the vote was so close. Mr. Gorsuch is from Colorado. He's known for being a very reliable conservative vote on the court. He's also known for defending religious beliefs. And when he was at Harvard, he was a classmate of Barack Obama. And so the last justice on the court is Brett Kavanaugh. He's a conservative. He was appointed by Donald Trump, and he just barely made it through the approval process. You can see the Senate vote was 50 to 48. Maybe you remember, or just maybe you learned it yesterday in the other set of notes. There was a holdup when Mr. Kavanaugh was going through the Senate approval. A woman, Christine Blasey Ford, accused Mr. Kavanaugh of harassment back when they were teenagers. So at the side there is Mr. Kavanaugh's yearbook photo. I know in the Senate hearing he was questioned for some of the things he wrote. So if you remember watching any of the hearing on TV, it was clearly very emotional for Dr. Ford and for Judge Kavanaugh. Ultimately, the Senate decided to approve him, and he's the most recent Supreme Court justice. And that's it. That's just a quick biography on everybody that's on the Supreme Court. I hope you liked it. And so if you look on Schoology, there's just a couple questions for you to answer about this presentation. Thanks for listening, everybody. See you next time.